With a wider scope in the fields of medical, accounting, finance, and engineering, programming is no longer confined to computer sciences and software engineering. Everyone is becoming a programmer these days. Even with so many applications and scope for learning, programming remains to be an intimidating field for new learners. But it's not because coding is too complicated. Generally, people are new to coding and programming tend to make some basic mistakes when they start learning the subject. Consequently, they end up abandoning the subject, adding to the tally of countless failed programmers. So what are they doing wrong? In this video, I'll talk about 5 costly mistakes which lead to programming students to abandon the field. If you're making any of these mistakes, I'll talk about how you can avoid these mistakes and continue your merry way towards becoming a successful programmer. So let's get started. The first mistake, looking for a perfect curriculum. As a beginner, it's important to get your feet wet without worrying too much about curriculum quality. Often new learners will spend a lot of time searching for the right curriculum, the perfect one. These people searching for the right textbooks, online courses, but they actually never do any coding. If you're ever in a discussion with such an individual, you will realize how they talk so much about the right curriculum, but they'll never talk about how much they code or what new programs they might be working on. So what should you be doing instead? If you're one of these people, stop searching right now and start writing some code. If you search for too long, you can end up getting bored and programming can become an intimidating field for you. Instead of searching too much, start with basic programs like the famous Hello World program in any language that you choose. I suggest you start with Python because it's an easy language in terms of syntax and has a large user base. Just play around with the code and you will start to feel more comfortable about the subject. Also get a strong grip on the basics of programming and prepare yourself for the curriculum. The time for searching for the right curriculum will come eventually, but by then you will be well prepared for it. If you absolutely need structure, then start with the interactive tutorials on the Python website. The second critical mistake, learning too advanced topics to start. As a beginner, it's easy to fall for the latest and fancy trends and technologies that you hear about in online tutorials. However, most people aren't prepared for those technologies because they lack solid software development foundation. Generally, these technologies are too advanced for beginners, and eventually students fail to grasp the concepts in such subjects. As a result, they start thinking that programming is too hard for them, and they end up failing as a programmer. Since there is so much information on the internet these days, I understand how easily it is for one to get distracted because of lack of knowledge. For example, you should feel comfortable with the basics of Python and navigating a code editor before advancing to focused libraries like Pandas or NumPy, trying to apply machine learning techniques. So what should you be doing instead? Using another example, if you're interested in learning web development, avoid the latest and greatest web development frameworks until you have built a solid foundation. Start with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and then learn about frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue. With a systematic study and proper sequencing, there are higher chances of success. I always suggest new students to work on building a strong foundation so you can understand how things are working. And then when you have a strong base, picking up new building blocks and even new programming languages will be much less of a hurdle for you. Third mistake, copying and pasting solutions. Most programmers get help from platforms like GitHub and Stack Overflow. I recommend students use these platforms too because they help you build a profile and can also contribute to open source projects. However, I always believe that copying and pasting a solution will not get you anywhere. So what should you be doing instead? As a programming student, whenever you search for a solution over the internet, make sure that you type in the code instead of just copy and pasting. Does this sound strange? Well, it's helpful if you want to learn a piece of code. While copying may do the job for you, it doesn't explain the key aspects of the code. For instance, you will not understand a for loop until you do a dry run of the code or write it by yourself. Similarly, auto-completion code editors are great for professional developers because they save time. But if you're learning a new programming language, use basic code editors where you must write all the code by hand and learn more about the syntax of the language you are learning. This way you'll make more mistakes, but you'll obviously learn from them too. When the time comes, auto-completion tools and Stack Overflow copy and paste will find their place. It's just that you don't need them at the start of your programming studies. The next mistake, unfamiliar to learning methodologies. New learners can easily get caught in unnecessarily superficial details about coding. A lot of programmers spend way too much time memorizing syntax or jumping down rabbit holes of the language feature sets. Some people just keep reading examples and don't practice them by hand. Remember, programming is not like reading a book and learning the concept. It's something that differentiates programming from other subjects that you won't learn until you practice what's inside a book. You can have all the tutorials and learning material with you, but it will only pay off once you start practicing it yourself. Sometimes new learners tend to become impatient about learning a new topic, so they avoid important details that they should have practiced by hand. As a result, they don't understand the topic too well and eventually fail at it. So what should you be doing instead? For new learners, I suggest that you use interactive tools to learn the programming language or to read books that have a lot of practical examples. Make sure to test examples firsthand and play around with variables and code structures to learn new things. Always remember that programming is an ever-growing field and it takes a considerable amount of time to reach mastery. Take things slow and follow a learning methodology that doesn't rush you into new things. With time and practice, you'll end up with a substantial knowledge that'll help you learn a new technology faster. The next fatal mistake is inconsistency. For me, inconsistency is the biggest factor why people fail programming, especially if you're learning a new language. You need to be consistent or you'll end up losing interest in the topic. A lot of people make the simple mistake and it costs them a lot of time. For example, new learners will be very passionate about coding, so they spend a lot of time coding consistently at the start. However, after 3 to 4 days, they take a break that can last up to a month or so. As a result, they get out of practice and forget everything they learned to start. If you're making the same mistake, it's time to correct it. So what should you be doing instead? It's a good practice to work in short but consistent phases. For example, you may work on a coding session for an hour, take a break, then come back half an hour later for another session. You need to plan out your lessons so there's sufficient break and enough exercises to keep you in practice. Remember, learning bit by bit is much better than not learning at all. Baby steps can take you a long way in your quest of becoming a successful programmer. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to watch my self-taught programmer guide now. See you in there.